All right. Yep. All right, we'll go ahead and get started here in a minute. All right, we'll go ahead and call to order the Winnebago County Board meeting. It is Thursday, March 10th, 2022, and the time is 6 p.m. And invocation pledge allegiance is myself, so please stand. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we stand before you tonight, seeking your guidance and your wisdom, not only to make the best decisions for this county, but to be the best that we can for this county. We ask that you look over all of our first responders, all of our workers that do so much for us every single day. And we ask that you look out for our brothers and sisters in Ukraine who need your help now more than ever. In your name we pray. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Is there any changes to the agenda, Mr. Thompson?
No changes, thank you.
All right, thank you. The clerk will call the roll, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll start with Mr. Booker, Mr. Butita, Mrs. Crosby, Ms. Fellers, Mr. Gurl,
Present.
Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Lindmark, Mr. McCarthy, Mr. McDonald, Mr. Neighbors, Mrs. Red,
Present.
Mr. Salgado, Mr. Schultz, Mr. Sweeney, Mr. Sony, Mr. Webster, Mr. Westcott, Mr. Arena. Mr. Chairman, 15 board members present, 5 board members absent.
Excellent, thank you, clerk. We have a quorum. First, we need a motion to allow for, I think it's Ms. Red via Zoom. Motion by Mr. Arena, second by Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Westcott. Any discussion on the allowance? Hearing none, clerk cast a yes vote for all members present. All right, we'll move on. No awards, no presentation, no public hearings. We did have one sign up for public presentation, but I do not see him. So we will go ahead and move on. I'll need a motion to approve the minutes, approval of February 10th, 2022 minutes and the layover of February 24th minutes. Moved by Mr. West. Can't even think. Mr. Lindmark. Mr. Webster, gone. All right. Any corrections, deletions to the minutes? All right. Anyone opposed to the minutes? Seeing none, clerk, please cast a yes vote for all members present. Move on to the consent agenda. I need a motion for the consent agenda for the raffle report and auditor's report. Need a motion for the consent agenda. Mr. Tassoni moves. Need a second. All right, Ms. Crosby seconds. Any discussion on the consent agenda? Seeing or hearing none, the clerk cast a yes vote for all members present. There are no appointments, so we'll move on to standing committees. Chairman Salgado, Finance Committee, please.
Right now, we have to focus on some of those colder temperatures, below average type of high temperatures today, with many of us right around 25 to 27 to 28 degrees for highs. Outside, currently partly cloudy skies, nice sunset tonight out in Grand Meadow. So we'll continue to watch just those temperatures.
Ms. Red, if you could please mute your. Thank you. Perfect, thank you. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Finance Committee has 5 items today. One is 4 in the regular and 1 unfinished business, which I'll take at this motion as well. Perfect. So I'll start with the first resolution, a resolution to exercise option to purchase the parking lot located at 310 South Church, 320 and 324 Chestnut Street, Rockford, Illinois, and I so move.
So moved. Second on that. Ms. Crosby, second. Discussion?
Be straightforward. I think we kind of talked about this, but everybody, it's right behind, right across the street from BMO Harris parking lot, which we lease out right now, and obviously behind Urban Equities where they're building their facility there, their new residential residence there. But I don't know if anyone has any questions or regarding that property.
All right. Any questions on the resolution? All right. Seeing, hearing none. Is there any opposed to the resolution? All right. Seeing none, the clerk will cast a yes vote for all present. Next,
Yes,
Mr.
dear
Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. Our next item is a resolution authorizing settlement of litigation, Kaylin Cotman and Christopher Wilkinson versus the County Winnebago in the amount of $35,000, and I so move.
All right. Moved by Mr. Salgado, second by Mr. Hoffman. Any discussion on this resolution? Seeing or hearing none, clerk will cast a yes vote for all members present. Next, please.
Yes, our next two motions are to be laid over. I'll read them in, but then I would like to suspend the rules and vote on those separately. The first one is ordinance for approval of budget amendment for implementing the PREA standards protecting inmates and safeguarding communities. And this is to be laid over, but I'd like to motion to suspend the rules and vote on this tonight.
All right. So there's a motion to suspend the rules. Do we have a second? Second by Mr. McDonald, Ms. Gorel. Any? All right. The rules have been suspended. Any opposition on the motion to suspend? Seeing, hearing none, motion has been made. Rules are suspended.
All right. So I move to approve ordinance for approval of budget amendment for implementing the PREA standards protecting inmates and safeguarding communities.
Excellent. Do we have a second on that ordinance? By Mr. McDonald. All right. Thank you. Any discussion on the ordinance? All right. Seeing and hearing none. Is there any opposed to the ordinance? Seeing none, the clerk will cast a yes vote for all members present. The ordinance is passed. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next item is ordinance for approval of budget amendment for Emergency Rental Assistance Program 1, and I'd like to move and suspend the rules.
Excellent. So there's a motion to suspend. Do we have a second? Ms. Gorel? All right. Is there any opposed to suspending the rules on this ordinance? Seeing or hearing none, please mark yes for all members present on the suspension of the rules, and the ordinance is up for passage.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I move to approve ordinance for approval budget amendment for the Emergency Rental Assistance Program 1.
Excellent. So there's been a motion. Do we have a second? All right. Ms. Crosby seconds. Ms. Gorel. Any discussion on the ordinance? All right. Seeing or hearing none. Is there any opposed to the ordinance? Seeing or hearing none, clerk will cast a yes vote for all members present. Mr. Salgado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our last final item for today under unfinished business is ordinance for approval of budget amendment for the Winnebago County's Coroner's Office, which was laid over on February 24th, and I so move for its approval.
All right. Second by Mr. McDonald. Any discussion on this ordinance?
Mr. Chairman, I know
Yes,
there was
please.
a question, Mr. McDonald, at the Finance Committee regarding the additional equipment. Did that get answered? Okay, all right.
Excellent. All right. Mr. Arena.
Chairman, I believe Mr. Thompson had mentioned to me that this was going to be amended to pay for a portion of the equipment from a different funding source. Is that correct?
Yes, I see that in the packet, the amendment that I was referring to is part of the resolution, so I don't think there's a need to amend the resolution. Originally, the equipment purchased in the amount of $39,900 was part of the transfer from the general fund, but the coroner has sufficient fund balance to pay for the equipment in that dollar amount. So the actual transfer from the general fund is the $70,400. But that's reflected in the packet.
But the version that passed committee was the amended version?
Chairman Salgado, can you help me with that?
I believe it was, no, it wasn't. Mr. Schultz is shaking his hand.
I think the resolution that passed from committee did not include this amendment. The amendment is in your packet. So there should be an amendment from the board.
Okay.
To reflect
Therefore, I move that we amend as the resolution is presented to us in the board packet.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, so do we have a motion on the floor for that amendment? Okay.
That is the amendment.
As amended. Okay, second by Mr. Butita. Any discussion on the amended ordinance? Let's see here. Any opposed to the amendment? Okay, seeing none, please cast a yes vote for all members present to amend the ordinance as reflected in the packet. So now we have the ordinance as amended in front of us. Is there any discussion on the ordinance as amended? Okay, hearing none. Are there any opposed to the ordinance as amended? Seeing or hearing none, clerk will cast a yes vote for all members present. The ordinance has passed. Mr. Salgado.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So I do see that we do have new business. Would you like me to proceed and?
Please.
Okay. All right, so there is an ordinance for approval of the budget amendment for purchase of the parking lot at the corner of Church and Chestnut in the amount of $1,135,600. I so move.
Okay, motion moved. We need a second, please, on the ordinance. Oh, I thought this was okay. We need a motion to suspend.
Because it's an ordinance. That is correct.
Sorry.
So I'd like to suspend the rules and vote on this tonight.
Okay, thank you. So there's a motion to suspend, second by Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Westcott. I guess no discussion on the, okay. So any opposed to suspending the rules on the ordinance? Seeing or hearing none, clerk will cast a yes vote for all members present for the suspension of the rules for the ordinance. Mr. Salgado.
So then I go ahead and move on the ordinance of approval budget amendment for the purchase of the parking lot at the corner of Church and Chestnut in the amount of $1,135,600.
All right, so moved, and we need a second on that ordinance, please. Second by Ms. Crosby. Any discussion on this ordinance? All right, seeing or hearing none, the clerk will cast a yes vote for all members present. Mr. Salgado.
So that concludes our finance report.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, next up, zoning committee, Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Chairman Gurl. We have no report this evening, but our next zoning committee meeting will be on the 23rd of this month,
Excellent, thank you.
5:15. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Up next, Economic Development Committee, Chairman Westcott.
It's been a long time since I've been up here. We have a resolution to grant $25,000 from host fees to the Rockford Area Convention and Visitor Bureau, RACBB, to support the Grand Bundle New York event that's happening, and I so move.
All right, the motion's been moved. Need a second by Mr. Hoffman. Any discussion on this resolution? Mr. Arena.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. there was some conversation about this issue and concern about using host fee funds as the funding source. And some of us in those conversations would like to examine other alternatives to host fees for the funding. So therefore, I move that we send this back to committee for further discussion. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, there's a second by Mr. Booker, Mr. Schultz, and Mr. Webster to send this back to committee. Any discussion on that? All right, hearing or seeing none, is there any opposed to sending this back to committee? Please note Ms. Crosby is a no. We'll cast a yes vote for all other members present. Mr. Westcott.
Okay, we're going to plan on having a meeting for economic development on this coming Monday at 5:30 p.m. March 4th.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Westcott. Thank you. Next, we'll move to operations and administrative. Chairman McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Operations is 2 resolutions this evening. The first resolution, submitting to the electors by referendum the advisory question of increasing the tax levied by the County of Winnebago, Illinois, for the specific purpose of maintaining River Bluff Nursing Home, and I so move.
All right, the motion's been moved, second by Mr. Butita. Mr. Lindmark, is there any discussion on this resolution? Mr. Butita.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we're bringing this resolution before the board again. We sent it back to committee to change the language in the actual question that's going to be on the ballot, and simplify it, and to include some suggestions from some other sources. So basically the question, in my opinion, is 2-part. It informs the voters as to what they're voting for, in essence, to let them know, if they are unaware, that the County of Winnebago does operate a nursing home that provides short-term rehabilitative care and long-term nursing care. So those are the things that the nursing home provides, and we're asking the voters if they're in favor of increasing the property tax levy to the amount of an average of $150,000 home. It would be an annual increase to the tax bill of $25. So I think passing this bill will give guidance to the board to help us resolve the ongoing fiscal situation we've had with the operating budgets at River Bluff in the past few years. So I would urge all my board members to vote for it, and this did pass out of committee unanimously, so I would hope to see us to pass it and see it on the primary ballot June 28th. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Butita. Ms. Gore?
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I don't ever really remembering us saying on a proposition like this, or a proposal that $25 on a $150,000 home. I don't remember ever seeing that, but I do remember seeing how much the levy is and how much it would be raised to. And I think that should be the way it should be read. Now, I haven't seen the new writing of this. For some reason, I usually get all of everything that's on tonight to read, and I didn't get any of it. So I haven't been able to read how this is going to read on the ballot. Would someone please read that?
Mr. Butita, please.
You can do that. 1 second here. Yeah, just lost it there. Okay. So the question, Ms. Gore, will be, shall the County of Winnebago, Illinois, continue to own and operate a short-term rehabilitative / long-term skilled nursing facility for the residents of all incomes by increasing the amount levied by the county from 0.0445 to 0.1 for the specific purpose of maintaining the River Bluff Nursing Home. And then there's the example of the property tax increase on a $150,000 home would approximately result and a $25 annual increase on your tax bill. And to answer Ms. Gorel's question about how much money this would raise, Mr. Richter estimated it would be $2.4 million. I didn't see the need to list that amount on there. I think the voters are going to be more concerned about what their individual responsibilities are going to be.
Thank you, Mr. Butita. Ms. Gorel?
On a $150,000 house that can act, and your taxes are based on the market value of that house. So if somebody's been living there for 30 years, chances are their market value of that house might be down to, let's say, $100,000 or $125,000. But yet you're stating that flatly that all houses, and how do you know all houses at 150 have a loan to value of $150,000? I think that's very misleading and it should be removed. And I make an amendment that that line right there, the property tax rate increase of 150,000 home would approximately result in a $25 annual increase on a tax bill. You still have to remember too, on that tax bill, many people will have a senior citizen discount, they will have a freeze discount, and there's another discount, owner occupied, which would take the $150,000 tax, or what you're taxing, you're saying, that could bring that way down. And so it's based on the loan to value of a home, not the actual selling price of today. And I do think that needs to be removed. Thank you.
Okay, so is that a motion to
I would
remove
make a
that
motion
language?
to remove that line, yes.
All right, so there is a motion to
It's very misleading.
understand. So there is a motion to remove the language referencing the amount of the home versus the amount of tax paid. Is there a second on that motion? Mr. Tassone? Yes, please, go ahead, Mr. Tassone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, and I just, I could see it being good or bad, depending on how someone perceives it. But yeah, there are a lot of different scenarios out there where some people aren't paying the actual fair market value of the assessed valuation because of many different things. Like I say, I don't know if it's good or bad, but I would at least second Ms. Grove's motion.
Okay, so second by Mr. Tassone. Mr. Webster, was that a second or? Okay. All right, so the motion has been second. Are there any opposed to the motion? You want to discuss? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Discussion on the amendment. Is there any discussion on the amendment, Mr. Webster?
Mr. Webster first.
Okay, then, okay. Mr. Webster, please.
Yeah, I think removing that line entirely, I think that at least with that line in there, that gives the taxpayer, I think, a baseline to work from, at least gives you some idea of what that levy increase would be. And so should we say, $25, or if, well, Angie's pointing out the actual value versus the tax on it there, if there's discrepancy on that. But, and I understand what you're saying, but somehow or another, it's got to be worded there so it's understandable. And I think with that line in there, once again, that gives you at least some kind of an idea. You follow me? I don't know how to explain that really, but.
Mr. McDonald, did you have something?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with Mr. Webster. We need to have something on the question so the average voter can relate to what it's going to do to their property taxes. So this $125,000 home on average, there are definitely extenuating circumstances to everybody, not everybody's, but some people's property tax bill. I support this as written. I think it's the best way to get a broad communication to give people, the voter, some idea what they're talking about financially. Thank you.
Mr. Arena, then Ms. Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wonder, I concur with Mr. Webster and Mr. McDonald's comments, and I wonder if Ms. Gorel would feel more comfortable with it to clarify that it's not value if it were to read on a home assessed at $150,000. So it's clear to the voter that we're talking about what your assessment is and not necessarily the market value of your home. And that, I think actually it's advantageous to the passage of the referendum for people to realize that if their home is assessed at $150,000, this is only going to cost them $25,000 for, in that year. What, $25, I'm sorry,
Okay.
$25.
That sounds better.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No,
Thank you.
well, thank you, Mr. Arena. Ms. Corral?
Also, what he just said is probably more true. Or otherwise, it has to be said that the market value of your home is $150,000. The other thing on here, I noticed, it doesn't mention River Bluff at all. Most people will know this as River Bluff, not just a nursing home, period. So that needs to be put in there because that is what we're dealing with. It needs to be named.
I think it's on the end of that.
Is it?
Yep.
Says a skilled nursing home facility for the residents of all incomes by the increase of the amount of the levy. No, it doesn't say that. It just, oh, here it is. I see it. I got it. Thank you. I found it.
Ms. Corral, would you be opposed or in favor if it said assessed value in that, as Mr. Arena has mentioned? or-
Yes, absolutely. The way Mr. Arena put it, you know, the actual assessed value of $150,000, it should not say $150,000 home. Because I've seen $150,000 homes with an assessed value of $100,000. And, you know, you have to go by the assessed value, not the actual amount.
Thank you. Ms. Crosby, then Mr. Butita.
My concern is that the rank and file really don't know the difference between assessment and market value. So I'm in favor of leaving it like it is. If you say that for a property of $150,000, it would be at $25. For something $300,000, it would be $50. For something $75,000, it'll be $12.50. It gives the voter a benchmark to work from. And once we start throwing in words like assessment and market value, et cetera, I just don't think it'll help the cause.
Thank you, Ms. Crosby. Mr. Butita?
Thanks again. We definitely need some wording in there because I think to leave it at increasing the levy from 0.0445 to 0.01 or 1 is going to leave the voter confused and have no idea what we're talking about. So we definitely need the example in there to give the voter some idea of what the increase will be.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Butita. Mr. Tassoni?
Thank you once again, Mr. Chairman, and I'll just throw this in there just because, and I've seen referendums over my lifetime. They're all confusing, and I have people asking me all the time, what's this really mean? But maybe if it said a maximum of $25 on a $150,000 house, does that do anything for anybody? I don't know.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Tassoni. Ms. Corral?
Thank you. As long as we have some other realtors in this room, I'm sure they can tell you that, not in this market that we have right now, but other markets, when people are buying a home, what they do is they look at the assessed value instead of, I'm going to pay $150. Because when they make offers, they'll go back to the assessed value, which, you know, it's fine for our taxes, but it's not for the sale of a home. And people do know what an assessed value is, and that's the way it should be read. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Corral. Mr. Kelly?
Only an advisory referendum. It's not actually doing anything, it's just an advisory referendum.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Ms. Corral?
Also somewhere on the line said that it would be, if it's voted for or against, that it would be active as of that day. This is how it always is. Go back and take a look at some of the stuff, because when it gets on that ballot, it will say as of this day it will be enforced. Thank you.
Mr. Butita?
Actually, because it is an advisory referendum, the board still has to take action on this, voting on that specific levy increase. And then we probably wouldn't do that until the next budget cycle. So I don't see the need to put any date in there at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Butita. Any other discussion on amending as proposed to strike out the language of related to the dollar amounts? Any other discussion? Okay. Clerk, Mr. Arena?
I just want to be clear on Ms. Goral's intent. So right now, what we're voting on is striking the whole sentence. Is that correct? Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I believe that is her motion.
I look at the assessed value when I'm looking at the tax amount. Anyway, I just want to be clear what we're voting on. Right now, we're voting to strike the whole sentence.
Correct.
Okay.
I believe that was the motion made and seconded by Mr. Tassoni, is to strike that language from the resolution. All right. Any other discussion on the amendment? All right. Seeing hearing none. Clerk, would you call the roll for the amendment, please?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We will start with Mr. Butita, Mrs. Crosby, Mr. Gurl,
No.
Mrs. Gorel, Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Lindmark, Mr. McDonald,
No.
Mrs. Red,
Yes.
Mr. Salgado, Mr. Schultz, Mr. Sweeney is still absent, Mr. Tassoni, Mr. Webster, Mr. Westcott, Mr. Arena, Mr. Booker, Mr. Chairman, that is 6 yes and 10 no.
Okay, the motion to amend fails. So the original version is in front of us now. Any discussion on the original resolution? Mr. Salgado.
Mr. Chairman, just want to reiterate what I said on the Finance Committee. I proposed an amendment, just leaving the tax levy increase instead of actually the two-part question. I have a problem with that. And I kind of explained in the Finance Committee the simple fact that you're asking the voters two questions in one referendum question, which is confusing and misleading at the same time. And here's why. So you ask, shall the Winnebago County own and operate the rehabilitation / whatever, and then on top of that, to increase the tax levy. So one of the question is, so my suggestion to them was, if we're in the process of increasing tax levy, then we should limit it to the tax levy. We shouldn't put the language of own and operate the nursing home, et cetera, et cetera. That has nothing to do with the question. If the whole purpose of this is whether we want our citizens to increase the tax levy, point blank. If we are going to ask whether we want it to still operate it and own River Bluff, then we should ask that question. We've done it with the recorder's office when we said we were going to consolidate with the clerk's office. So we should be upfront with that. What I don't want to happen is that we use it as a tool and say, well, the voters said no. So that means they want to close or sell whatever, not own River Bluff. That's what I don't want to happen, right? If we're going to be explicit, ask the simple question about that. That's my problem with the referendum question for the ballot. I understand it's controversial. We don't want to. I understand that this tax levy would bring in $2.4 million, which is currently what we operate a deficit on, right? We don't get that, and we have to make a decision, right? We are currently, if those that are on the Finance Committee, we are working with River Bluff on 5-year projection, trying to make decisions on staffing. So it's not our only alternative. I understand it's an advisory, but it's leading to the question of, that's what I don't want us to say, hey, voters said no. To me, it seems that we shouldn't own it and operate it, right? So that's the only thing that I want going forward. is that it's an advisory. We make that decision at that point in time. And it shouldn't be just on that piece of the tax levy increase. It should be fundamentally on the operational piece. Is there anything that we can do? Because it does provide a service. You hear me talk all the time when I'm up here trying to do the budget, and nobody wants to cut anything because it affects the services. So the question is, fundamentally, is this something that the county wants to be responsible for? And I don't want that to happen to say at the end, well, the voters said no, they don't want a tax increase. And as part of it, it said shall own and operate River Bluff. And I don't want that to be used as, that's it, we don't want it, right? That's my concern with the ballot question for the referendum. Now, you'll say, well, it's explicit, it's giving exactly what River Bluff does. It does, but at the same time, it's bringing that question of, shall we own and operate, continue to own and operate, and then ask the question about increasing the tax levy. It's not fair from my perspective. I think a lot of us have that same expression, Ms. Goro and some other of us, on that motion, right? I don't think it's going to, whatever the question be. For one of the things is that I explained when the tax levy, if we're going to talk about it, if I'm a big believer in the River Bluff, I'm going to be marketing and vice versa those that are opposed to the tax levy increase. They're going to get out there in media and blast it, whatever the case may be. And so from my perspective, if we are truly just asking about the tax levy, we should have limited it. And now it failed in committee. That's why I voted yes for it, because I had no support for it behind it. So, but I just wanted to be clear where I stand on this and what I don't want to happen going forward, where we say, well, the voters said no, therefore they don't want to own and operate River Bluff, and therefore it gives us the opportunity to move forward in that direction without looking at the operational side of, whether we can be viable or not viable going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Mr. Butita?
Hey, thanks again. So this is an, excuse me, an advisory referendum. It is not a backdoor attempt to close River Bluff Nursing Home. And in fact, Ms. Vaughn could probably back me up. The only way River Bluff could be closed is by a voter referendum. Is that correct?
Ms. Vaughn?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, under the county's code, it depends on when the original referendum passed and when a River Bluff Nursing Home was erected. So if it was directed after a certain time, then we do have to get another question put on the ballot. And if it was erected before then the county board would have to vote to dispose of River Bluff. So I would have to determine the time frame of when River Bluff was erected versus when the original referendum passed under the county's code.
Okay, well, may I follow?
Yes, please.
So this resolution in no way would satisfy an attempt to ask the voters to close it. Am I correct?
In my opinion, no.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Butita. Any other questions, discussions? Ms. Gorel?
County board voted, they didn't call it River Bluff at that time. They had another name for it in 1854. Does that help you?
Unfortunately, it does not, Mrs. Gorel.
Then I'll give you it all in writing if you'd like.
That works.
Okay, I'll
Yes.
send it to you.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Ms. Gorel. Any other discussion? Mr. Salgado, please.
So I just want to clarify to Mr. Butita, not that I'm disagreeing with him. I understand it's an advisory, right? In no shape or form am I saying that that's going to shut it down. What I'm saying is it gives you the momentum to potentially move in that direction. And that's where I kind of see where this question is going. Now, I could be misinterpreting what your position is or what your intent is or what your agenda is, but I'm just telling you that's the way I look at it. I understand it's an advisory, it's not binding, we can make a decision, but I look at it where I could say, hey, that gives me clear momentum in that direction. Now, whether it's another referendum, whether it's we take a vote and cut it out, whatever the case may be, then it's so. But I just want to be clear on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Mr. Arena?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From my perspective, I think first of all, I think River Bluff provides an important service in the community, and we need to look at whether there would be other options to River Bluff for the residents who live there. So I think my own personal opinion is we need to keep their well-being in mind. That being said, if the way the question's written, I think it communicates to the voter that if you want to have this service provided, you have to pay for it. That's what's communicated to me by the way the question is phrased, and I think it's appropriate for them to understand that. And even though I think River Bluff is valuable, if the people who I represent don't want it, then I'll respect their opinions. And this is for the public. I think it's important for them to understand the county board is not raising taxes by doing this. The county board is asking voters if they want the tax raised or not. And I'll respect their opinion. And it may come down to that the people who live in Winnebago County don't want us to provide this service. And I mean, even though many of us think we should, that's just the will of the voter. So I think the question is properly phrased. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arena. Any other discussion? Yes, Mr. Salgado.
Just be clear here. I'm just, from my perspective, right? If you're going to ask the question whether we want the county, then ask the question, right? If we want the tax levy to increase, then ask the question of the tax levy. That's all I'm asking, right? From that perspective. I'm not asking, to close it or not close it, right? And that's why I asked that question in finance. So I understand your point, Mr. Arena, on this, that you'll respect the will wishes, just like we did with the recorder's office, right? We consolidated. We went, it was on the ballot, and decision was made. And when we get to that point, then it is what it is. But like I said, I don't want it to be a tool where it's giving momentum to one direction, right? If we're going to ask the question about it, let's ask the question. If we're going to ask the question about taxes, then we ask the question about taxes. That's it. Point blank, point simple. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Ms. Crosby.
I call the question.
Question has been called. Second by Mr. Westcott. Okay. All right. Is there any opposed to calling the question? Mr. Hoffman is opposed. Records state that. Ms. Gorel is opposed to calling the question. Please cast a yes vote for all other members present. Question has been called. And we will go ahead and take a roll call on this, please, Ms. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll start with Mrs. Crosby. Mr. Gurl.
Yes.
Mr. Gorel. I'm sorry, Mrs. Gorel. Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Kelly. Mr. Lindmark. Mr. McDonald.
Yes.
Mrs. Red.
No.
Mr. Salgado. Mr. Schultz. Mr. Tassoni. Mr. Webster. Mr. Westcott. Mr. Arena. Mr. Booker. Mr. Butita. Mr. Chairman, that is 12 board members yes, 4 board members no, and 4 board members absent.
Thank you, Ms. Clerk. The resolution passes. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank also Mr. Butita for his hard work on that
Absolutely.
previous resolution. Thank you very much. Next resolution is amending the organizational structure of the County Board of the County of Winnebago, Illinois, and I so move.
All right, motion's been made. Do we have a second on the motion? Mr. Arena, Ms. Crosby. Resolution is in front of us. Any discussion? All right, seeing or hearing none, or is there any members opposed to this resolution? All right, seeing none, clerk will cast a yes vote for all members present. Mr. McDonald.
That concludes the report. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next, Public Works Committee, Mr. Tassoni.
Thank you, Chairman. We have no report.
Thank you. Next is Public Safety Judiciary. There is no report there. Unfinished business, looks like we covered that. Announcements and communications, Clerk Gamow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The items listed below were received as correspondence.
Excellent, they'll be placed on file. All right, new business has been covered. Is there any announcements from board members? Mr. Butita.
There you go. Thank you. I'd like to acknowledge the staff at River Bluff that came to our attention last week. The Operations Committee, Mr. Thompson, informed us that the federal government rating of River Bluff was improved. And the federal rating system that the federal government imposes, it's basically a 5-star type of rating. 5 stars is very good. 1 star is very bad. River Bluff was previously a 3-star. They had a 3-star rating, which is average. Through the hard work and dedication of the staff out there, the government has recognized them and moved them up the ladder. And why is that important? Because almost everybody that comes into living at River Bluff is a referral from some type of medical facility, most likely a hospital. And when that person is being referred and when they're talking to the patient and that patient's family, they're making that referral to locations and they're letting that person know what kind of location they're being referred to. So when River Bluff can say we're a 4-star facility opposed to somewhere else that might be just a 3-star facility, when all things are equal money-wise, you're probably going to go to the 4-star. So that'll help in our marketing recruitment to bring residents to River Bluff in the future. So I want to thank the staff, and I'm sure everybody here appreciates their efforts. Thank you.
Well noted. Thank you, Mr. Petita. Any other announcements from board members? Mr. Lindmark.
Yeah, I just wanted to announce on April 9th, you're going to have police versus fire hockey game at 1 o'clock at the BMO, and that benefits, obviously supporting our first responders, but it benefits Jamie Cox Foundation, Greg Lindmark Foundation, and hospice. And then following that evening, 6 o'clock, the Ice Hogs game is specialty jersey night, and the jerseys they're wearing are for the Rockton Wagon Wheel Cardinals, semi-pro team in the late 50s, early 60s. And the specialty jersey that auction that night is actually benefiting the Greg Lindmark Foundation. I have tickets to either event, but the main point is show your support to our first responders. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lindmark. Any other announcement, communications from board members? Mr. Webster?
Yeah, I just want to know if you or Patrick or somebody want to mention about the remodel here.
Yep, we'll get to that right next.
That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Webster. Any other announcements from board members, communications? All right, Mr.
Yeah.
Thompson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to announce to the board that our March 24th meeting and April 14th meeting will be at Memorial Hall. So on the agenda, it said April 7th. It's actually April 14th. So the March 24th and April 14th meeting will be conducted at Memorial Hall. And the purpose of that is that they're going to be revamping all the audiovisual electronics, IT components in the room. And it'll take that amount of time to get it installed and tested and make sure it's ready for us to for our second meeting in April. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. And there will be ample parking there. I know some nights Coronado does hold events, and sometimes it's first come, first serve for those parking lots there. So I guess I'm just curious about parking, if we will make some kind of attempt to make sure that there's parking somewhat close.
I'll work with the staff to make sure that we have ample parking.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else from any board members? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Mr. Hoffman, second by Mr. Booker. All right. Any opposed to adjournment? Hearing none, all those in favor, say aye. All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.